Well, when we talk about the electric grid, we're really talking about the electrical system in its totality, from beginning to end. The transmission, the generation, the distribution, that's the whole grid. It does no good to just generate it and then not be able to distribute it. You got to be able to distribute it. It does no good to just distribute it and not be able to get it to the end user. All that is the electric grid.
Some people have called it the single greatest invention of humankind, which is hard to argue with. But if you think about, we have, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of households, businesses, factories that are pulling electricity. We've got something like 10,000 power plants in the country, 600,000 miles of wires that connect them. And if you think about how amazing just-in-time delivery is, the electric grid is not just in time, it's instantaneous. Because we have very small amounts of effectively no storage in the system. And so when somebody watching this right now who just turned on their computer to watch this, sent a little signal through their electric wire that caused some power plant somewhere to slightly increase their load.
Obviously, as we've experienced with natural disasters, hurricanes, flooding, that a lot of times that leads to it. And as we enter the winter period, a lot of winter events are going to impact it, snowfalls and that type of thing. But primarily our concern right now, particularly from a government standpoint, is cyber attacks.
We're in an extremely dynamic time, and we built this system for a fairly stable set of conditions. We're now in this world where the wildfires are coming at ever greater frequency and taking out big parts of California, where technologies that used to be the cheapest technology are now increasingly the most expensive technology. Nobody builds coal plants because they're just a really lousy investment. There wasn't some master plan that we got to. We sort of evolved this patchwork of systems because Illinois did one thing, Texas did something else. Eventually we connected the grid. And so the pieces hung together, but we trying to say, can we make an intentional change against a very sort of somewhat organized, somewhat disaggregated system? And if we don't, how do we adapt to that?
Well, once it's in there, it's electricity, but making sure that we have reliable baseload energy is extremely important. Let's face it, solar and wind power just aren't as reliable. Now, solar power in Arizona, okay. Solar power in the upper Northeast, that's a problem. And a concern, wind on the Pacific seaboard, okay. But when you get into other areas of the country, it's not as reliable. That's why I subscribe to an all-of-the-above type energy strategy, including nuclear. Nuclear is reliable baseload energy, and we have to have that.
The challenge with renewable energy is that we can, in a fossil fuel-driven world, you move the fuel to the plant. In a renewable-driven world, you move the plant to the fuel. Why is it harder to permit a plant that doesn't burn anything, that doesn't have any emissions, than it is to permit something that burns stuff? And the reason is because we've built this system where we can permit moving the fuel. It's very hard to permit building the plant where the fuel is and now moving the power to where that is. But managing a system where we're moving generators to where the fuel is, we're building wires, we're building a more storage-intensive system is a different kind of system.
Well, I'm very concerned about it, particularly as it relates to our adversaries, China and Russia. And this is why during the Trump administration, President Trump actually issued an executive order saying that we would not be using equipment from our adversaries that were built and manufactured in Russia or China, because they actually had back doors to which they could get into our system and potentially disrupt that system. So that and of course then the Biden administration kind of did away with that. But I think it's a good cautionary measure, if you will, to make sure that we're using American-made products for American-made electricity grids.
Now, as we move to a more internet-dominated controlled system, the system has become much more nimble. It's become much more robust. It responds much more quickly. But now there is a door through which a malicious hacker could come in and say, if I can tweak this point here, I know it's not like I have to go in and change the signal on 3,000 different, it used to be if you take out the grid, I don't know, set a transformer on fire. Now you can take out a much larger portion of the grid by getting into the control architecture. And power grid managers are well aware of that risk. They've put up a lot of, firewalls and controls, and there's a lot of rules we put about what you have to do. But it is a very real concern.
A lot of people say that the next war is going to be fought, is going to be a cyber war. And there's a lot of truth to that. So that's why we've got to be prepared. We've got to strengthen our electrical grid to make sure that it can withstand the cyber attacks, to make sure. We had an example not too long ago with the Colonial Pipeline, the disruption that went there that caused a lot of concern, a lot of problems with being able to get energy to certain areas in the South.
Any grid that depends exclusively on one thing is in danger. But the challenge we face, I think, is that there's an old saying in Washington that losers will always cry louder than winners cheer. And the people who are the incumbents who benefit from this fairly static system know what they have to lose. The people who will benefit from a system that's more flexible for the changes we see coming don't even know the changes are coming yet, much less that they might be able to benefit from them. And I think we're in a very politically challenging time to solve that right now, and hopefully we'll solve it before it becomes more visibly challenging.